Welcome to Crime Collapse. Today we'll be talking about the Hinterkaifeck murders, where 6 family members were killed on the remote village. So let's get into it. Andres Gruber was born on November 9, 1858, in a small Bavarian village called Grindstatten. In 1886, he married a woman named Cecilia Schanhuter. Before meeting Andreas, Cecilia had been married once, and after her divorce in 1877, she received a farm called Hinterkaifeck as part of the settlement. When she married Andreas, they moved to that farm. From her first marriage, Cecilia had 3 children. Martine, born in 1879, another daughter also named Cecilia, born in 1881, and a son named Andreas, born around 1883. After she married Andreas Gruber, they had 2 more children together, who is Victoria, born in 1877, and Sophie, born in 1889. Victoria grew up and later married a man named Carl Gabriel from the town of Weidhofen. They married on March 11, 1914, and on the same day, Victoria's parents transferred ownership of Hinterkaifeck to the young couple. A few months later, World War I began, and Karl was sent to the front. He was reported killed in a battle of Arras on December 12, 1914. At that time, Victoria was already pregnant, and she gave birth to their daughter, Cecilia Gabrielle, on January 9, 1915. In 1915, a serious accusation came to light. Andreas and his daughter Victoria were charged with having an incestuous relationship that had taken place earlier that year, between 1907 and 1910. The court found them guilty. Andreas was sentenced to 1 year in prison, while Victoria served 1 month. Several years later, in 1919, trouble returned. Victoria told her neighbor and lover Lorenz Schlittenbauer that her newborn son Joseph had been fathered by Andreas through ongoing sexual abuse. Lorenz reported Andreas to the authorities. Andreas was arrested, but Lorenz withdrew his complaint shortly afterward. During the trial, Lorenz brought up his claim again while giving sworn testimony, but the court said his statements were not strong enough to convict Andreas. Andreas was released, but because of certain things he had said while defending himself, the court decided he would not receive any compensation for the time he spent in custody. In the end, Lorenz agreed to adopt Joseph as his own son. In the months before the murders at Hinterkaifeck, several strange things began happening around the farm. The family's maid, Crescence Rieger, had left about 6 months earlier. She later said she had heard strange noises coming from the attic, noises that made her believe something was wrong with the house. She became so uncomfortable that she decided to quit. In March 1922, Andreas Gruber found a newspaper on the property. It was from Munich, and he had no memory of buying it. At first, he thought the postman had simply dropped it by mistake. But when he asked around, he learned that no one nearby received that newspaper, so there was no clear explanation for how it ended up on the farm. A few days before the murders, something even more unsettling happened. After a snowfall, Andreas noticed footprints leading from the forest straight to the farm. The tracks stopped at a door with a broken lock that led into the machine room. Someone had clearly approached the house from the woods, but there were no tracks leading back out. The same night, the family heard footsteps coming from the attic. When Andreas went to check, he did not find anyone there. He mentioned these things to neighbors, but even when people offered to help or check the property, he did not accept any assistance. None of the strange events were reported to the police. Around this time, Victoria's daughter, young Cecilia, told a friend from school something troubling. She said her mother had run away from the farm the night before the murders, after a severe argument with Andreas. According to the girl, Victoria had been found only a few hours later in the forest and brought back home. On the afternoon of March 31, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm. Her sister walked with her to the property, also helping her settle in for a short moment, and then went back home. That visit made her one of the last people to see the family alive. Later that night, something or someone drew Victoria, her little daughter Cecilia, and Victoria's parents out toward the barn. They walked through the stable and into the dark space, not knowing they were being led into danger. Inside the barn, they were attacked one by one. The killer used a mattock that already belonged to the farm and struck each of them on the head. After taking their lives, the person moved into the house. Inside the quiet rooms, the killer used the same weapon again. Little Joseph was asleep in his bassinet and Maria was in her bedroom, likely settling in after her first day. Both were killed where they rested. By the next morning, everyone in the farmhouse was gone, and the property sat silent, with no one knowing what had happened during the terrible night. 4 days passed before anyone discovered what had happened at the Hinterkaifeck. On April 1st, two coffee sellers, Hans and Edward Swarovski, came to the farm to take an order. They knocked on the door and tapped on the windows, but the house stayed quiet. They walked around the yard looking for someone, but the place felt completely empty. They did notice that the gate to the machine room was open, but since no one was around, they chose to leave. Meanwhile, little Cecilia had missed school for several days without any explanation, and the family did not show up for Sunday church either. People in the area began to feel that something was off. On the morning of April 4th, a mechanic named Albert Hofner arrived at the farm to fix the engine. He waited outside for about an hour, expecting someone to come out and meet him, but no one ever did. After waiting long enough, he decided to start the repair on his own. He worked for more than 4 hours and then left, still without seeing a single person from the household. Later that same day, around 3:30 in the afternoon, a neighbor named Lawrence Schlittenbauer sent his son Johann and his stepson Joseph to the farm to check whether they could find anyone inside. The boys returned saying they had not seen anything unusual but still had not met anyone. After hearing that, Schlittenbauer went to the farm himself, bringing along two neighbors, Michael Paul and Jakob Siegel. When they entered the barn, they found the bodies of Andreas, his wife, Cecilia, their daughter, Victoria, and young Cecilia lying there. A short time later, they searched the house and found Maria and baby Joseph inside the living quarters. That was when the truth finally came out. After 4 silent, unsettling days, the entire family was found dead. A team of investigators from Munich was sent to Hinterkaifeck to solve the murders. But from the very beginning, their work became difficult. When they arrived, the crime scene was already disturbed. Curious neighbors and onlookers had already walked around the barn, touching things and even moving their bodies. Some people had gone inside the house and cooked meals in the kitchen, leaving almost nothing untouched. On April 5th, the day after the bodies were found, court physician Johann Baptist came to the farm and carried out the autopsies right inside the barn. From his examination, it became clear that a mattock, a tool used on the farm, was most likely the weapon. But strangely, it was not found anywhere at first. The autopsies also showed something heartbreaking. The younger Cecilia had survived for several hours after the attack. The victims' skulls were later removed and sent to Munich for further study. At first, investigators thought the motive might be robbery. They questioned traveling workers, people passing through, and nearby villagers. But this idea fell apart when they discovered a large amount of money still inside the house. Nothing valuable had been taken. Then another unsettling detail appeared. It looked like the killer or killers had stayed at the farm for days after the murders. Someone had fed the cattle, eaten all the bread in the kitchen, and cut fresh meat from the pantry. The farm had been lived in while the bodies were still hidden in the barn. The police began building a long list of suspects. Over the years, many people were questioned and arrested, but no one was ever proven guilty. The case was finally closed in 1955, still unsolved. The last interviews connected to the case took place in 1986, just before Detective Chief Superintendent Konrad Müller-Thunmann retired. The mystery of Hinterkaifeck was never solved. Officials wrote down that the family might have been drawn to the barn because they heard the animals making noise. But this idea did not seem very believable later, because investigators learned that sounds from the barn could not actually be heard from inside the house. Around 3 a.m. on April 1st, only hours after the murders, a farmer named Simon Reislander was walking home toward Brunnen. As he passed near the edge of the forest by Hinterkaifeck, he saw two unknown figures standing still among the trees. When the figures noticed him walking by, they quickly turned their backs, so their faces were hidden. Simon continued on his way, unsure of who they were or what they were doing in the dark. The next night, an artisan named Michael Plockel walked past the farm. As he approached the property, he noticed smoke rising from the chimney, showing that someone inside was heating the oven. While he was passing by, a person from the house came toward him and lifted a lantern straight into his eyes, making it impossible for him to see the person clearly. Michael Plockel kept moving, but he remembered the smell of the smoke. It was foul and unpleasant, nothing like normal firewood, and no one checked the oven to see what they have burned. Years later, in May 1927, another strange event was reported. A resident of Weidhofen said that a stranger stopped him at midnight and began asking questions about Hinterkaifeck murders. In the middle of the conversation, the stranger suddenly claimed he was the killer. Before the man could respond, the stranger ran off into the forest and was never identified. These moments added even more mystery to a case that already had no answers. After the murders and Hinterkaifeck, investigators began to look at people who might have had a reason or the chance to commit the crime. Over the years, many names appeared, and each one brought a different story. One of the first names that came up was Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband. He had supposedly died in France during World War I, but his body was never found. After the murders, rumors spread that he might still be alive. When the Second World War ended, some former prisoners from the Schlobenhausen area said that a German-speaking Soviet officer told them he was the killer from the Hinterkaifeck case. Some of these men later changed their stories, which made everything uncertain. Still, the idea grew because there were claims that Carl had been seen after he was reported dead, and that he once said he wanted to move the Soviet Union. But two soldiers who had served with him said they had actually seen his body during the war, which strongly suggested he truly died in France. Another major suspect was Lawrence Schlittenbauer, who had been close to Victoria after his first wife passed away, and he was the neighbor. He drew attention because of the way he acted on the day the bodies were found. All the doors were locked, so they broke a gate to get inside. But after they discovered the dead family in the barn, Schlittenbauer walked to the front door of the house and opened it without trouble. A house key had gone missing days before the murders. The suspicion of him is a house key had gone missing days before the murders, and people wondered if he had been given that key, maybe by Victoria. He also went into the house alone, saying he was looking for Joseph, and he moved some of the bodies, which might have damaged important evidence. In the years that followed, Schlittenbauer remained a focus of suspicion. He sometimes made comments that sounded like he knew things only the killer would know. In 1925, he was seen at the ruins of the farm, and when he was questioned about it, he said the killer had not been able to bury the bodies because the ground was frozen. Some believe this showed inside knowledge, and might have simply known how the land behaved in the winter. Before his death in 1941, he won several slander cases against people who publicly accused him. The Gump brothers, Adolf and Anton, was also considered. Adolf was connected to a far-right paramilitary group called Freikorps Oberland. A warrant had already been issued for Adolf's arrest for killing. Adolf had already died, and Anton was held for a short time, but there was not enough evidence, and the case against him was dropped. Another strange lead came from a woman known as Therese. Another strange lead came from a woman known only as Therese T. In 1971, she wrote a letter explaining something she remembered from childhood. She said that she once saw the mother of two brothers, known as Carl S. and Andreas S. During the conversation, the woman claimed that her sons had committed the murders. She supposedly said that Andreas regretted losing his penknife at the scene. A penknife had indeed been found when the farm was torn down in 1923, but no one could prove who it belonged to. It might have been one of the victim tools, and even the former maid said that she had already seen the knife around the farm before the murders. This lead also ended without results. Another man, Peter Weber, was named by Joseph Betts. The two had worked together in the winter of 1919 till 1920. Betts said that Weber talked about Hinterkaifeck and claimed to know personal details about the family, including the incest between Andreas and Victoria. Betts also stated that Weber once suggested killing Andreas to steal the family's money, but when Betts ignored the idea, Weber never brought it up again. Next were the Bickler brothers, Anton and Carl, along with a farmhand named George Segel. Crescence Reger, the former maid who had worked at Hinterkaifeck, suspected them. Anton had helped with the potato harvest at the farm, so he knew the layout well. She claimed Anton often spoke badly about the family and said they deserved to die. She also remembered that the family dog, usually aggressive around visitors, never barked at Anton. She also remembered that the family dog, usually aggressive around visitors, never barked around Anton. She also remembered that the family dog, usually aggressive around visitors, never barked at Anton. She reported that on the night of the murders, she spoke to a stranger through her window, and she believed it was Carl Bickler. The brothers were also suspected of working with Siegel, who knew the family had money. Siegel denied breaking into the house. Though he admitted that he had made the handle on the mattock. the very type of tool later used in the murders, and that he knew where it was kept. She also pointed to the Tyler brothers, Joseph and Andreas, who had committed small burglaries before. She said Joseph once came to her window with an unknown man and asked about the family. She did not answer, but she remembered that Joseph seemed to know which room each family member slept in and talk about how much money she had. She also recalled the two men looking toward the machine room and then upward as if trying to understand the layout. Years later, an entirely different name appeared, Paul Mueller, in a book called The Man from the Train. Author Bill James suggested that Mueller, a German man who had lived in the United States, might have been responsible. Mueller had been the only suspect in an 1898 family murder in Massachusetts, and researchers believe he might have killed many families in similar ways. James believed it was possible Mueller left the US around 1912 when people started noticing the pattern of family murders. He thought the chances that Mueller committed the Hinterkaifeck murders were about equal either way. Over time, all of these names were discussed, questioned, and examined, but none of them were ever proven guilty, and the true killer behind Hinterkaifeck was never found. Many books, films, and reports were made about Hinterkaifeck murders. Police students later studied the case and agreed on one main suspect, but the name was kept private. The case is still a mystery. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching Crime Collapse. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to see more videos like this one. I'll see you in the next one.